Hey, welcome to Taylor's Trick-Taking Table. I'm Daylight Taylor. It's weird being up at this hour. It's very bright, and I don't get why people do it. But I'm here to show you a Kickstarter preview video for 535. It's a game by Kenichi Kabuki inside Beppu, and it's being published by Portland Game Collective. So that's the start of what I should fully inform you is a huge bias. Take this whole video with a grain of salt. Multiple reasons, really. It's a Kickstarter video. It is by Portland Game Collective, who are my friends. It's a huge bias. And then the biggest bias of all, they're actually going to be publishing next my game. So I have a game that's like trick taking and deck building. It's called Zip Zap Zop. Check it out. But huge bias, like to the moon bias. So take everything I say with a huge grain of salt, as seen before. Interestingly enough, we actually covered this game when it was just a Japanese import, when we were calling it 535. And funny thing about that is, got a couple rules wrong on that English translation from mistranslation really, from Japanese. So this version has the correct rules and a little bit more, which I'll obviously show you at the table. And why don't I guess, explain the hook now. The premise is kind of like a climbing game where you can add to what is being played, like the meld that's being played. So, for example, let's say someone plays a single, right? In classic climbing game, you can play a bigger single. Or to beat that, you can play a bigger single. But what if you don't want to just keep playing bigger and bigger singles? As you can see, this is kind of getting out of hand. What if you wanted to add to the meld and change it up? So maybe you want to add another card to that single and make it a pair. So now we're pairs now, right? So the meld isn't singles anymore, we're now melding off of pairs. And you can play a bigger pair, or you can just add on to that and start doing 3 of a kind, or bigger 3 of a kinds. So the game's still a climbing, shedding game, so it has that strategic feel of planning out your hand, but also it has the tactical nature, because melds can change at the drop of a hat. Nice tie-in there, Taylor. Well, let's go to the table and I'll show you how to play. Here we have the game set up for 4 players, so you're going to cut out 4 cards and deal the rest equally to each player. We have point chips over here, and then also some handy player aids. 535 is a climbing shedding game, so players are trying to shed their hand as fast as possible, but also they're playing a climbing game where they'll play melds to the center of the table. We have this handy player aid over here, which explains which melds can be played. So it's like numbers, so a single or pairs or triples of the same number, or runs. Interestingly, in this game, singles and pairs and triples work how you would expect, where higher numbers beat lower numbers, like 2 9s beat 2 1s, or 2 15s beat 2 9s. However, the interesting thing is with runs, as you can see here, the lower the run, the stronger. So a 15 and 14 actually gets beat by a 12 11 or a 2 1. So let's jump to the lead with Pikachu here. So on your turn, you can play up to 3 cards, so 1, 2, or 3. And since Pikachu has lead, they're going to choose this lead action. So they're going to play to the central meld. So looking at their hand here, they have some pretty good cards. Maybe they decide to lead with a run of 2, so a 3, 4. Going to Pikachu in the sky here, they can now do a few different options. They can either overwrite, so they'll play a stronger meld, or they can add to the meld. Let's do an overwrite first, because I see they have a 1 and a 2 in their hand. So a 1 and a 2, because it's a run, is going to beat the 4, 3, because it's a stronger run. So then it goes to beat Pikachu there. The other action you can do is something where you actually can add to the meld. It's this one here. It would change the meld. So in this case, it would go from pairs to triplets. And as you can see here, it's going to go from a run of 2, because Beach Pikachu has a 3 and a 4, that they're going to add to now having a run of 4. Look at that. So now when it comes to Father John Misty, she's actually in a super tough spot, because now that there is the strongest run out here and there's already 4 cards, she can't really do much to it. But the interesting thing in the game is if there's ever a run of 5 on the table, or a set of 4 or 5 in certain player counts, that will end the trick immediately, because no one can actually do anything on that run. So thankfully for Misty, she can add a 5 to this run, and that will end the trick right away. So when the trick is over, you just clean up the trick, and then the person who triggered that is going to lead to the trick. So now it's Misty's turn. And again, Misty, can play a single or pairs, so maybe she plays the 2 pairs. And so this would continue until one player is out of cards. And once that happens, players see the cards left in their hand, and they're going to count up the points on them. And points are bad. You do not want points in this game. So let's fast forward the game a little bit. Here at the end, it's Misty's turn, and she plays a 13-14. So each player actually had cards left in their hand. So you're going to pick up the cards in your hand, and you're going to look at the points underneath the big rank there, and you're going to see how many points you just got for that round. So as you can see, Pikachu and Squirtle over here, they got 1, 4, 6, 8. So they're going to take 8 of these tokens. Then you're going to shuffle up the cards, redeal, and keep playing hands until someone hits 20 or more points. When that happens, whoever has the fewest points is the winner. Last couple of rules to explain here. Like I said, the trick could end either with a run of 5 or sets all being out. So that is all 4 cards in a set at 2 through 4 players, or 5 cards at 5 to 6 players. The other ways it can end if everyone passes. Again, if you pass, you can't come back in. Or these special 8s, which I haven't explained. These are yellow, a little bit of lightning here. If they are used to overwrite or add, that will end the trick immediately. So let's say Beach, Pikachu played those. Misty could play this 8 and a 7, and that would end the trick immediately, even though maybe Pikachu and Squirtle over here had a 1 and 2 that could technically have been played on this. There was an 8 and a 7, so that ends the trick immediately, and Misty would then lead to the next trick. And that's how to play 5-3-5. So that is 5-3-5. And again, before you take anything else, this is so biased, so I can't fit a grain of salt back here. So I'm just going to put this shirt, this white reminder shirt, around me just to remember. Super biased. In fact, I think what would be super helpful is if you wanted to check out my original thoughts on 5-3-5. Definitely check that video out. I think it captures mainly my favorite things about the game. I know in that rules teach and in those final thoughts, there were a couple rules off. The fact that melds with more cards could beat melds with fewer cards was a possibility in that mistranslation. And then also the fact that the 8s could just like end when you let it, as opposed to you have to either overwrite or add an 8 to have it actually end the trick right away. So those two little rules, interestingly, make me like the game a ton more. I was talking about in that game, especially at like 4-player or higher, that the game is just so tactical that the meld would just completely change by the time it got around to you, when you could overwrite and do kind of what you could do in the mistranslated rules. But playing it now with the correct rules, I found it's pushed it more toward the strategic camp, and that's something I personally like more. And when it comes to like 4 and 3-player, I like it a lot more. So I remember recommending, I think, 5-3-5 at 2 players mainly, and then now I have like I think a more of a solid grounding to say 3 and 4 are both much better now, much more strategic. I think even at 2, there was kind of a strategy with the mistranslated rules to just like hold on to 3 card melds and then just like bomb with them, or hold on to 8s and just kind of bomb with them. And now that like those easy bombs are out of the way, the gameplay is much more smooth. And just in case you don't go back and look at that original 5-3-5 video, this game, not just the remaster, but this game specifically, I think has a wonderful back and forth between strategy and tactical nature. The game kind of allows you to be able to play a shedding climbing game, but never feel too bad if you're left over with a few cards or 1 or 2 cards left in hand. I notice it was interesting, I was talking to someone who doesn't like climbing games because there's often that feeling of, I tried to go out, I brushed it, and like I didn't quite make it, and now I'm sitting there with like a card or 2 in my hand, and I feel kind of like, oh man, okay, I'm just gonna sit here as everyone kind of plays around me, and it's almost like I lost a turn in a sense. I just feel like goofy. I'm just like sitting here, and that never really happens in this game because everyone can just add a card, or high cards and low cards are good depending on what they are, right? Because low cards are good for runs, high cards are good for sets. So there's not really a bad card or a bad hand in this game. So it's really nice how everything's really, really balanced. So that's kind of initial thoughts on the game. But to get back into this edition, the specific edition has, I think, wonderful kind of quality of life touches. So starting off with these scoring tokens. So in most trick takers, like, they might not have these and it might not be the biggest deal for your group. You know, someone just gets like a pencil or paper or gets their phone or like a scoring app, and that's totally serviceable. But what I noticed in this game is the score is super important because that's how the game ends. The end game trigger is if someone gets 20 points. So a lot of times players are just like, okay, who has the most points? Who has what points? Can this be the last hand? Like, how close are we? So there's a lot of those questions. So the fact that there's scoring tokens in this and players can just like look across the table and just see what player scores at, it streamlined the game a lot, for our group at least, where there's a lot of people like, who scores that? What scores that? So those type of people who care about the score like want to know, is this the last hand? It helps soothe their fears a lot. So I love that touch. And then the other touch, which I think is also huge, is player aids. So having what you can play, what beats what, like what actions you can do, how many cards, which is a huge one, how many cards you can play, 1, 2, or 3. I've noticed playing this edition, players looking at it and kind of using it to really reinforce the rules, or like the small little rule tidbits of like, oh wait, how does overriding work versus adding work? And this game, I think, is intuitive once you get going, but the player aids, which I think is the benefit of player aids, is it's those small rules that you're like, how does this work again? And I found those to help a ton with teaching so much. And then the last thing is it has a bunch of variants in the back, which is funny enough, they included the US mistranslation variant. So the old video where there's those couple rules wrong, which is funny to have. And also the 2-player variant for a much shorter game. And I think personally my preference, it's like a much more streamlined version of 2. So it's nice to have, I think, kind of a more holistic package for what I think is a really, really great game. But again, bias everywhere, all around. So that's 535, and again, bias, but definitely check this out. I love the fact that a hand doesn't pigeonhole you. It's not good or bad. It's how you maneuver it, right? And I think it's one of my favorite 2-player climbing shedding games. It handles the snappiness of what I want from a 2-player shedding game so well. So yeah, definitely check it out, and thanks so much for watching.